For my next Friday class here, I'm going to use these two photographs. I'm going to paint this one then in more detail and a bit more carefully as traditional watercolour. What I'm going to do is just do this part now and leave that part to finish with the students, because I want to get onto this doing the lesson step by step with them. This one just watercolour, doing a detailed foreground and wet into wet background. This one all wet into wet with acrylic inks, and then finishing off this with splatter on top with emulsion paint to show them we can get different effects much more easily and quickly. But say, they will look very, very different, but much more freely, and I think we'll enjoy it and loosen up and have fun. Right, my drawing is now ready on this top one. So I'll make a start on this little watercolour, and we'll just do this area here, leaving that for the class. Okay, let's make a start on these little flowers and things here. Got some water in the watercolours. Now you may remember, if you've watched other videos of mine, watercolour, we start with the lights, work to the darks. So let's start. We're not going to work on this bit, we're going to work on all of this bit. Let's start with these sharper areas first that we're going to go harder around. So we're going to put wet next to dry when it dries, which will give us a hard edge. So first I want to come down to a very light cream and to use some aureolin yellow, just strangely enough aureolin yellow over this. A wash here, start off with amongst the whites, behind here and through here. And there's lots of wet next to wet down there too, so I need to leave some of that for later. Let's come back to these pinks at the moment. I'm going to go to my cobalt violet, which is a lovely light colour, pending it's still not filthy. And I want to work in some of that cobalt violet in and around these lights here. You see it's working into that yellow a bit now. It's a cooler colour around here. I'm going to add a bit of blue into there in a minute. Right down through here, quite light there. Very light areas here. Just drop some of the colour in, sort of slightly wet into wet there, keep it slightly blurred in the background. Before I start dropping in some even stronger reds there. So some of this is a little bit more focused. This is the focused area here and here we want to work on in a moment, so let those dry down a bit now, because it's going to be wet into wet in the background. I want to take a little bit of the rose and start to drop that in here and there till it's wet into wet background. Just hinting at these lovely colours behind before we really do soften them in. Again, we'll let that dry off a bit. As that's drying off, I'm going to just start dropping in some of the cools into here, just around this area. Some blues going in amongst these pinks, which helps to bring them out. Well, this paint is now dry, so we can work over it a little. Start to work some of the details in more. We'll work these deeper blues and so on up. To take some ultramarine now. Just come in with these slightly deeper blues amongst the details of this, so we get dark against light into here. So if I put this deep blue, this ultramarine around here, and glaze it, in other words, put a layer of it across here, we can bring that in and cut that out. And you can see how that works. So we'll leave that nice and light now there. A little bit of detail. We'll paint these leaves in a bit more care now, shall we? Let's take a sap green there, and I just want to give it a coat first of all. Quite heavy, because I'm going to go quite dark onto this in a minute. Across that one as well. So we're painting these in a bit more detail. Just get that wash in. And right up into there. Through here. And it's coming into that leaf there a bit as well. Down to here too. Some of these lighter areas. These are the ones that are a bit more in focus, so we can afford to have slightly sharper edges on these before I put wet into wet. Come back with some clean water and just soften those edges in a bit. And then we'll take some much warmer green. I'll mix some raw sienna with some ultramarine blue, so that we get a really lovely dark green leaf coming in here, right down and through there. So ultramarine and raw sienna, which is a nice sort of golden yellow, will give us this very deep golden green for the leaf. While it's still wet, we'll just drop it in there. It's coming between some of these bits here as well. And you see how the darks now against the light start to bring the colours out. So we've just about brought up now the sharper edges of these items. A bit bluer around there. Some more of the green comes up into that. By just using wet into wet here, get some lovely effects behind this flower. I'm going to go even darker in a minute just around this flower. Now I want to go much darker. I'm going to take some Prussian blue. A little touch of rose into that. And just drop in there. Really dark. Light against dark, dark against light, cool against warm. Picking out these light and dark colours here. You see how one thing starts to stand out against another. Down there we've got a very strong bit of stem. May not be quite dry enough yet to paint it. I want to be a bit harder. It's starting to become three-dimensional. Now, I'm going to take a bigger brush, I'm going to take a wash brush now, and deliberately start to paint in this area a lot more. Some water right across here, and then make up our dark again. But I want a little bit more rose first, just a little bit more colour going on. These pinks to the background here. And go back into the cobalts and ultramarines again. Just letting them go wet into wet back here before dropping in the darker colours yet again. In other words, what I'm making is an out of focus picture. And now I'm painting some of the wet next to drier colour down here. That's making sharper edges. At the moment I'm just trying to bring the light against dark up here. I think you're starting to see we're getting the effect of the photograph now. There's the photograph and here's our actual piece. As we're building up these layers of wet into wet. So I'm going to let that dry down a bit now before working some darker colours in more detail. And I've almost gone as far as I'm going to go, just to prepare ready and show the students. Just want to show you a few more harder edges here just to bring these out. Still working with our very darks. I'm going to go just into some of these areas and just bring them out a little more sharp edged. Some of these are a little bit darker yet around here, and as were some of the darks that are a bit deeper into here, maybe just under there. And it just brings these things out a bit, just these few little extra bits of dark just to tidy things up a bit. So that stem stands out a bit. A little bit darker underneath this leaf here, maybe. Down around that flower. And I think that achieves about what I want to achieve at this stage before I show them how to do similar. Maybe that's what they want to do. Yeah, so we'll leave that at that for the moment, ready for the lesson. But I've got to now leave white paper or just a tint of paper for things. If I want a harder edge, we have to let it dry. One way of doing that is to have a hairdryer handy. You can dry your painting quite quickly with a hairdryer. So that's something to remember, you know, if you, and time and everything else. It means that we take the light off in this case. So what I'm going to do first is just paint these light tones in, let them dry off, and then get the wet into wet behind here, and then go back on those tones and wet on dry. So I'll have wet against the dry, then I'll have glazes over the top of the dry that we're doing now. Put a little bit stronger colour just into this edge, look. Just drop it in there, spreads out. I want to come right here with a glaze of that. So this is, sorry, a wash of that. This is a wash of it, all the way around here. Comes down. Now it's very strong down there. I'm going to take a little bit of the rose. I'm painting wet onto dry now. This isn't a wet area. So I'm deliberately using harder edges at the moment because they are quite hard edges, these shadows, aren't they? You see, I've got used more pigment there than there, patterning in there. Just let them spread out on their own. And this is what I was saying, Pippa, about freshness. Don't start fiddling with it. Don't start working over it too much. Try and get it in 1 or 2 brush strokes. Just come down there, letting it spread out, letting it do its own thing. But just watching how far it goes. And I want to be a bit cooler here. So I'm going to deliberately take my cerulean again. I want to be cooler in this area. I'm going to drop that right into there and let that come in. A little bit of sunlight. These areas here I can start to come in, and I can start to do more detail into these if I need to. You see the harder edge against them now starts to make them, but there's no detail in that and it's closer, so I'm going to paint detail in a minute. There's greens coming into here. Right, now we've got 2 ways of doing this background. I can just put clean water on and then drop colours in, or I can put one colour next to another. What I'm going to do is do a little bit of both just to show you what I mean. Right, here I'm going to put just clean water all the way around the outside. So what I'm going to do is paint the wet around the dry now, leaving these bits of white. I'm going to go down to halfway here. So I'm going to paint this one way. Now if I go into there with my colours, it's going to stay fairly hard around that edge because it's a hard edge. And look how that starts to stand out. I'll take some darker and I'm dropping that into the wet. It's quite dark behind here, but it's not going to go beyond where I put the water. So down around there. So this is wet next to wet. I can do wet into wet with that the same way. I can go back into it, and I can drop wet into the wet next to wet to bring out these effects. For instance, while it's dry here, I can do a little bit more, put it over there, at the shadow. Let's take it as dark as we can there. I don't want to go too dark because we can have that problem again of it starting to look like a watercolour. So I'm going to go quite purple there. Can hint at these things going on in the background, and these little bits of dark will just start to bring out a bit more of everything there, a bit more purple. It's one colour over another, yeah. So when you want to go into detail, then we would let it dry, and we would pick up like this in more and more detail. If it's wet, it's going to be softer edges, which is what I wanted for the background. So what I wanted to do was show you how we could bring that out. So anyway, does that answer that question a bit, Sue? Does that, it shows you the wet into wet and how we can gradually bring out the sharper edges by going drier and drier, doesn't it? Now here we go. Come on. A thin coat. These big height brushes are lovely. I will show you in a minute just how we can do some textures with them as well. Now if you're not sure whether you've got that all over the paper, because you will need to make sure it's covered, look along the paper and you can see the shine, yeah? And I'm telling you, I'm not telling Granny to suck eggs, but I want to make sure that you understand some things you won't know, some things you will know, some things somebody knows, somebody else does, so just bear with each other. So not too much water, just enough to give it a coat. Start with your light colours, but I haven't mixed that yellow very well. Start with your light colours, and let's start painting these leaves pretty much as they are here. That's where they are. Just see how you can dabble about with these brushes. If that was dry, you could see you could get textures, couldn't you? So I'm going to get these, but we're not worrying about the white. Forget the white. We're only bothered about the light colours where they are. I want it nice and dark. So the white's going over the top of this. We want no white paper left at all. So the green and the orange gives us sort of brown. That's what we're just saying, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So down to here I want it browner, darker, to let that blend in. I want it a bit softer. See how that's softening in now? And let the accidents do the work. In watercolour we're doing what's called controlled accident, Leslie. Oh. Not uncontrolled accident. I don't think I have any. And this is what I want you to do, look, what I've got here, that's all we're going to need. And that basically has that background. Don't worry about these sticks because we're putting those in later. Yeah, my viewers will say, what are you doing? I just had one mutter and complain, and don't get many of them, but some of them seem to think that you're there for their beck and call. And this lady just wrote saying, it was a video I did about 3 or 4 years ago, so the filming is quite old. See how harsh that's getting now, so we could start painting harder effects on it, but I really don't want those. I'm going to soften them in a minute. She said, oh, it was a live demonstration. It was 2 demonstrations done in one sitting, a live one. So there was not background noise. I wasn't using a radio mic. I didn't have radio mics then. And she's saying, oh, I can't quite hear it properly, and oh this and oh that, and whinge. So I wrote back and said, well, look, this is free on YouTube. You know, if you want to buy the ones which are HD quality, and then pay some money out and get on my website. But how dare you basically complain when you're getting something for nothing here? And I said, you know, it is live. It's not. It's like when I'm out with the landscape. You do get birds, you do get cars, you do get. Soften that a bit where it's hard edge. I don't want hard edges yet. That will do me. I've still got it a little bit light in places, but I think I'm going to get away with that because let's move some of those. I don't want those. I don't want anything. I don't want any whites at all because that's all gone. Okay, so away go the students doing theirs. They're using big hake brushes at first, just to get used to using a hake brush, and then they're going to go on to using oval mops. In the meantime,
do we need this out?
not really.
Oh, okay.
Right. Come down to this one. Now, hopefully, we can have some fun doing some splattering. And I've mixed up some emulsion because it was too thick as it was. That's another thing. If you make the emulsion or the paint too thin, then it's going to, if you splatter it, you just see straight through it. If it's too thick, it doesn't seem to splatter very well. It goes on as sort of lumps of plaster. So we've got to try and get the mixture right. And then there's all these different ways we can apply that paint with a brush, with our fingers. So what we're going to try and do is get the effect of that blossom down here. And we're not copying, remember, we're using, that's what I'm saying about the art, it's what finishes up here that's what matters. So whether you use a brush, or whether you use, and that's, it's, you see with the fingers it's tending to go into lines, which I don't really want. But it does, I'm not that bothered because we're going to get the effects, whatever. We can flick it, you can bash it across your hand like that. I was going to say, don't leave your stuff here, not. So we can use the brush, we can use our fingers, we can use. Where have they gone now? And I want you to find the centre of some of these flowers again. So I'm just going to come back and just drop in little bits of yellow to find the centre of some of these flowers. So what we've done today is played with a semi-transparent, translucent medium, and we've gone on now with a matte medium. If we had to do this in watercolour, how would we have done it, Leslie?
Oh, it's not the foggiest.
Well, you have to leave the white paper behind. How do you leave the white paper behind? Either you've got to paint around it, or you put masking fluid on. Yeah, that's that masking fluid. So, I'm going to get these pinks going. So we'd have had to use masking because we want transparent.
Or is it Nanny? Or is it an assistant?
But I can see how it's coming out because even on the film now it's looking quite nice.
We don't want that in the way. Do you want the brush? I might use the brush actually. Try and splatter effect with the brush.
Yes, just play around, see what you can get with different effects and fingers and. Yeah, that's it, Sue. You're getting it. Yeah, Sue's got the idea. Look, she's doing them all right, better than me. They're all working. Go on, Leslie, go for it. Plenty of paint. Try and follow the patterns of this. In some areas you're going to get a lot more close together, in some areas not. So don't make them even. That's right. Really, plenty of thick paint on. Interesting to see the different techniques working already. Where Sue's using the brush very successfully here, and Pippa's going on with the fingers very nicely over there. What I'm going to do now is just take some black ink, and you could use a rigger for this, but hopefully I'll be able to do it with this brush. I need a slightly thinner one, so let me see. you want to paint in these branches, and they come in and out of the, you see, they're just broken, they come through here in places, they're not coming right the way through. And they'll stop here and there, then they'll start again, and then they'll come behind, and then they'll come in front. You see what I mean?
Snowstorm comes to mind.
You couldn't believe that 3 things could be so different.
No.
Or
Yeah.
4
Oh
things
yeah,
so
yeah,
different.
yeah. It's amazing. That's cool.
Well, this is, it's a snowstorm of blossom, isn't it? And sort of want to
Yes,
get these
yeah,
effects and
okay.
try
Yeah.
and...
That's all right. Yeah.
And that one,
I just wanted to show you this. Once you put a mount around things, just how they change as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's surprising what you do, but when we get back from them, just how nice they look, you know.
gosh,
And yours will be the same. We're going to look at yours in a minute, and you'll be surprised how lovely they look. It's very effective, isn't it? And you can see, you know, so simply done. But this was our first experiment, so I think Sue and I both overdid the white a bit, but they've worked. And they're mounted up and framed. They look lovely.